Well, it's time for the third and final instalment of our EFL playoff final previews for 2025. On a bank holiday Monday, we have the League Two playoff final at Wembley Stadium. A huge game taking place at 1 minute past 3, again due to the brilliant Every Minute Matters campaign. And for the third time, we will put the link in the eye above if you want to learn CPR in 15 minutes via Reviver. But this game has got a lot of meaning to it. For me as a Luton fan, one of these sides will be joining us in League One next season. And based on their playoff semi-final performances, it's very hard to know who it's going to be. As always, we'll encourage you to get involved in the prediction show. Get your comments in below with who you think's going to win. And remember to be specific if you think it's going to involve extra time or penalties. Which side do you think will be promoted and what do you think the score will be? But before we go and move on to the final, we've got to have a quick look back and recap of our semi-final predictions. And of all of the four leagues, I've had my first absolute nightmare with this one. I wrongly called all four games. I wrongly called both ties. And everything went out of the window from the form book, didn't it? The team that came in with no form at all went through and glided through with ease against the only team that came in with any sort of momentum. And then the two sides in the middle, well, the best defence thwarted the best attack and restricted them to next to nothing. As a result of that, I picked up no points, as you can see, and everyone who scored was able to get themselves a shout out here. But it wasn't many of you, because a lot fell into the same trap as me. Steve was one of those, but he did get 3 points because he correctly predicted the score in the second leg of the AFC Wimbledon tie, albeit he thought the Notts County would get through. Bobby got 1 point for predicting an AFC Wimbledon win in one of the ties. And Marco, to be honest, is the only real hero here. Regular player in the championship predictions. 5 points, got 1 correct score, and correctly predicted both teams in the final. So Marco, you are without doubt the League Two semi-finals match week winner. But now you've all got to back it up in the final. A massive one taking place at Wembley Stadium on Monday afternoon. It is 5th versus 4th. And the tightest gap in terms of points between any sides in this playoff weekend. Just 4 points separated AFC Wimbledon and Walsall this season. And now they go head to head for a place in League One. As we mentioned before, one of these teams will be absolutely devastated to be in the playoffs. We all know what happened to Walsall in the second half of the year. We'll get to them in a minute, but let's start with Wimbledon, who have now won 3 successive games by 1-0. And it's the thing we highlighted when we went into the playoffs was, could they maintain that defensive form? And our worries came towards the end of the season, particularly in those Port Vale and Gillingham matches that they were conceding chances. But why did we doubt them? Because again, I go back to that first day of the season when I was at Wimbledon Colchester. And the first half, Wimbledon were atrocious defensively. 2 goals down in a few minutes, conceding chance after chance. And they've become this unstoppable machine defensively. 35 goals conceded in the season, none added to that in the playoffs. You've got to give huge credit to the way they're set up because they're so disciplined. And I know in the first leg against Notts County, let's be honest, it could have finished differently. We'll be lying to ourselves if we didn't say that Notts County had the best chances. It wasn't an absolute onslaught by any means. But Notts County on another day could have scored 2 or 3 there. And it would have been a very different tie if Wimbledon had to chase into the second leg at home. However, they held on for that 1-0. Obviously, the late Jatta red card did make a difference, taking away the biggest goal threat, arguably, from Notts County. And in the second leg, that early Noiville goal, brilliant to see a young Luton youth product of the past doing well. But that just sort of killed the tie, didn't it? It put Wimbledon into a position where they could just trust their instincts and defend solidly. And while they didn't have much of the ball at home, while they didn't really show much impetus to go forward after that, they were so robust and solid. Let Notts County have the ball, knew the style they were going to play, but knew they weren't going to be able to break them down too easily. And in the end, Notts County were restricted so often to long-range shots or half chances and only managed 1 shot on target in the entire match, only created 1 real great opportunity. And just sort of restricted players at key areas. And without the likes of McGoldrick and Jatta, the 2 top scorers, of course, it meant they could focus their attention on certain other players. And while it was a contributing factor, once they got that early goal in the second leg, it really helped them manage the tie. And he did so very well. So you've got to say fair play to Wimbledon. Tactically, they got it spot on. Wasn't the most thrilling to watch, and it hasn't been for a lot of the year. They've only just scored over a goal a game. They've not conceded many whatsoever. But they're into that final. And like we mentioned yesterday with the League One show, they have got that natural goal scorer. Matty Stevens, if given a couple of chances, you'd fancy him to put one of them away. And maybe that's what Wimbledon are going to be pinning their hopes on when it comes to the playoff final. If we move to the flip side of that, though, and have a look at Walsall, I think a lot of us had written them off when it got towards the end of the season because the second half of the year they'd been terrible. Obviously, they lost low in January, which made a massive difference to them. Jamil Matt scoring goals, but not as frequently, only just in double figures this year. And of course, they have contributed goals from elsewhere in the team, but the fall off had been quite significant late in the season. They thought they were up on the final day after finally getting a win away at Crewe, only for Bradford to score an offside goal off their backside in the 97th minute. And that was another crushing blow for them, for a team that had been so far clear at the top of the table for so many weeks. To then end up in the playoffs, to then be coming up against a team who had flown in with an unbeaten run at the end of the season, to respond the way they did against Chesterfield, to get it tactically so right and to win so convincingly, you have to give them enormous credit. I was so surprised by how well they did. I think most of us backed Chesterfield to go through purely based on momentum. We see it so often. The team that just drops into that top playoff spot from the automatics so often is the one to miss out. But full credit to Walsall. In the away leg against Chesterfield, they set up perfectly. I mentioned I went to watch Chesterfield Harrogate a couple of months ago, and it's sort of a similar approach, but obviously Walsall have got a bit more of a ruthless streak on the break. They set up behind the ball. They only had a quarter of the possession in the match. Yes, Chesterfield had the best chances, but they didn't have lots of them. They probably should have scored, but they weren't being opened up at will, Walsall. But what they were able to do is they were able to hit incisively on the counter-attack. And once they nicked that sucker punch and nicked a couple of goals before half-time, became a very different atmosphere in the stadium, which was a very important thing for them in the first leg. Then in the second, of course, it was a pretty drab game for the most part. Let's not kid ourselves. There weren't bundles of chances. A very similar pattern. Chesterfield having a lot of possession, but unable to break Walsall down too regularly. Again, had one or two opportunities, but Walsall managed the tie pretty effectively. And late on, when Chesterfield had to chase the game, they were pretty incisive on the counter again. A really convincing win, but they're not going to be able to play that way against AFC Wimbledon. And this is what makes this so intriguing for me. You can't predict it to be a particularly exciting game because Walsall, while the highest scorers of the four in the playoffs this season, a lot of those came in the first half of the year. And the top scorer from those, the man who contributed a fifth of all the goals this season, left the club to go to the Championship in January. So when you wipe those off the goal tally, you're then pretty even between the two sides. And you've got a brilliant defensive record that they're coming up against. A side that aren't going to be open, aren't going to try and keep the ball all day like Chesterfield. You've got two sides that between them have had very little of the ball in most of their playoff ties. 26% in the second leg for Wimbledon, and in the two legs for Walsall, they were in the 20s for both. So who on earth's going to take the ball in this final? That's going to be the big question. You try and get some patterns and some hints going back in the head-to-head records this season. Walsall nicked a narrow away win earlier in the season. Then there was a draw in the second game in March. It doesn't leave us with many clues, does it? I could argue that this is the hardest of the games to call. Two managers that are relatively inexperienced in this situation, certainly from a coaching point of view, and two sides that had largely been out of form until the final day of the season and the two playoff matches, but then both handled them pretty admirably. Wimbledon, my only slight concern was despite their brilliant defensive record, they did give up chances against Notts County in that first leg, but then Walsall gave away some in the first leg against Chesterfield, but you'd argue in a defensive away display, you're going to get that. And both of them found a way to throw bodies on the line, to make saves, to keep clean sheets. And then in the second leg, they were both pretty solid and exemplary at home with very little possession. This comes down to who can impose their game the greatest. And there's part of me that wants to think, look, Walsall have reacted here, where nobody thought they were going to be able to after falling into fourth place, after their big drop down in the second half of the season, to then produce that in the playoff semi-final. Surely they're going to be able to do it now. But then we've seen this before and we've predicted wrong. It's arguably the hardest of the three to predict, and I found the other two almost impossible as well. So I think I'm going to go for a little bit of a wild one here, because everything would suggest this game is going to be 1-0 or 0-0 and go to extra time. There's no way you can see there being lots of goals. But surely that means something's got to give, because one of these teams has got to go and take the onus in this game, has got to take the possession, has got to be the aggressor. And depending on who scores the first goal, it could lead to a very different game. So I'm actually going to go for the highest scoring of the 3 playoff finals. Our other 2 from the 2 previous days are up in the eye above. You can see what I've gone for there. But in this one, I'm going to go for a higher scoring game. I'm going to go for 2 goals to 1. But have I decided who for? I think I have. I'm going to go for Walsall. And I know that that's probably not the most sensible thing to do, given Wimbledon's defensive record, say they're going to concede 2. But they did it against Port Vale, who are a top side, when they got promoted a few weeks ago. And Walsall have scored 2 in both legs against Chesterfield, who again haven't been the most solid defensively, but in previous weeks had looked fairly good. So even though I think both sides are excellent, I think they're so evenly matched. Of course, both of them have got goal threats. Both of them have got very experienced defenders in their team in certain areas. You go and look at Wimbledon's side. We mentioned Matty Stevens. He's been promoted from this level before, albeit automatically, but in the recent past. You look at Walsall's side. Jamil Matt is an incredibly experienced pro leading them up front. They've both got a talisman. They've both got experience in that attacking line. They've both got people who know what it takes to get over the line at this level. Albert Adoma came off the bench, made a huge impact in that second leg of the semi-final with 2 assists. There's experience everywhere. There's quality in both sides. But I just think, given that Walsall reacted the way they did in the semis, they might be the side that edges it. Again, for the 3rd time in a row, it's almost impossible to call. I don't blame you which way you go. But I'm going for Walsall to be promoted to League One with a 2-1 victory in the playoff final against AFC Wimbledon on Monday afternoon. That's just my prediction for the League 2 playoff final though. Do you agree or disagree? Let me know your score prediction and how you think it will happen down in the comments section. If you beat or match my score, of course, I will give you a quick response and a well done after as well. But for now, as I mentioned a moment ago, if you haven't seen our other 2 previews yet, you can find both of those in the eye above. There is another one to come as well, because next Sunday at Wembley is the National League playoff final. I predicted Oldham to finish 5th in pre-season and get promoted. Well, they finished 5th and are in the final. Will I be right with the final step? Join me next week as we preview that one. For now, though, thank you so much for watching as always. If you want to stay up to date with everything across the EFL, including Championship Manager specials and pre-season predictions, well, just a couple of months away now. And please do subscribe and turn that notification bell on. Chuck a thumbs up if you enjoyed this one. Have fun trying to predict this impossible game. Good luck to both sides. I'm completely neutral in it, so I hope you both have a great day at Wembley and may the best side win. And we'll see you again here in the middle of next week as we return to preview the last but not least of the 4 playoff finals this year at Wembley. The National League playoff final will be our attention next week. There'll also be Championship Manager specials to come. But for now, thank you very much for watching and enjoy the feast of football at Wembley in the EFL playoff finals this weekend.